behind so I can see what they're doing on their computers. Usually it's Facebook or something like that. Right? Not listening to me. But yeah, so I want to sort of introduce myself. I am a division head of the medical school, which is now a university, Northern Ontario School of Medicine University. We just became a university in April. My interest in radiation started basically about 50 years ago. When I was 10 years old. Because I was born and raised in a town called Elliott Lake, Ontario. At the time, it was the uranium capital of the world. Everyone who worked in Elliott Lake worked in the uranium mines. I think I did an environmental scan a few years back to help get a CT scanner in Elliott Lake. And at the time, there was one person over the age of 65 in Elliott Lake, when it was the peak of its mining. Now I think there's only one person under 65 there, but it's because it's a retirement home. But I was born and raised in Elliott Lake. My dad was a uranium miner. My dad got lung cancer and died of lung cancer when he was 67. So that's about 7 years for me now. And at the time, a lot of his friends died of cancer caused by mining. So everyone says, oh, it must be the uranium. It must be the uranium and the radioactivity in the uranium. Well, in those days, it was poor ventilation in the mines. Most of the people smoked. They had diesel machines running down there all the time, and diesel fumes are a major carcinogen. And they were drilling with no respiration protection on. And it creates dust, and in the dust there's silica particles, which are like little glass shards that get into your lungs. Cause inflammation. Inflammation actually causes tumor progression. So you're smoking, you're breathing diesel fumes, you got silicosis. And before my dad moved to Elliott Lake, he happened to work in a town in the eastern towns of Quebec called Asbestos, in an open pit mine. And he had this tumor, it was a mesothelioma, which we know now is caused by asbestos. So all these things, so I immediately said, well, radiation's bad, I gotta maybe learn a bit about it. And the biggest lesson I got was, when I was 10 years old, so 50 years ago, they came and surveyed my basement for radon gas, okay? And I remember sitting at the table, and the health physicist at the time said to my parents, well, you know, it's high, but as long as you don't spend more than, say, 2 hours a week down there, you should be all right, right? So I'm thinking, okay, I go downstairs, I get my hockey equipment, I'm out pretty quick. Dog food once in a while, so I'm calculating when I down there in my yard. Then it occurred to me, my bedroom's in the basement. So clearly I'm doomed because of radon gas. And so I had this balloon up here, because you probably see me rub my hair. I didn't get a lot of static charge this morning, it must have been the crappy shampoo I used. Because normally I can make it very static. But what I'm doing now is I'm collecting radon gas from the daughter products in the air we're breathing right now. And I'll show you a little later how much radioactivity is in this air you're breathing right now. And Chris mentioned earlier that we have radioactivity in our bodies. Well, from the minute you are a single cell living, you have radioactivity in your body. You're giving off, like you said, 4,500 decays of radiation a second, right now. Okay, so it's going off in your body. You're lit up with this potassium 40 stuff. It's everywhere. We drink water that has natural tritium in it. This water is radioactive because of the cosmic rays it hit. The hydrogen molecules in the air turn water into a heavy water and then tritiated water. It all happens naturally. We didn't invent radiation. Radiation was here. We can create radiation, but it's not something that man invented. It's a natural thing. You're exposed through your lifetime to radiation from two main sources. One is terrestrial, and that means you're getting radiation from this room. All the bricks are made of things that are radioactive. The materials in this room are radioactive. And you also get exposed to cosmic radiation from outer space. We're getting exposed to that right now. And roughly, cosmic radiation accounts for about 10% of all the radiation you're going to get from natural radiation, and then other 90% comes from the Earth's surface, the food we eat, the air we breathe. So it used to be that when I first started talking about this kind of stuff, that I would say 80% of all your lifetime exposure to radiation would come from natural stuff, and 20% would come from man-made or medical stuff. And it's basically, of the man-made stuff, 95% comes from the medical stuff. But guess what I say today now? I say instead of 80% natural and 20% man-made, I say 50% natural and 50% man-made. Well, the natural stuff hasn't changed. What's changed is the way we use radiation medicine. 60 or 70 million CT scans a year alone in North America, helping find disease and treat disease, saves millions and millions of lives. So we're using radiation more as a tool for finding disease and treating disease. And I think Chris maybe mentioned to me earlier, I work at a medical school. I am not a doctor, so physician I am not, so that's a non-disclosure thing. I'm not a physician, but I teach a lot of physicians. Believe it or not, we do not teach our medical students a thing about radiation in the first 4 years. Is that true?
I can testify to that, yeah. Well, other than that, it's super scary.
Other than super scary. And so I have students that learn in my lab about radiation and what low doses do, and they go into med school. And they listen to the people lecturing to them saying, radiation is bad, avoid it if you can. In fact, my daughter's at U of T right now. One of her lecturers this year, she's in third year, told her to avoid CT scans as much as possible because radiation is bad. So we're failing at teaching our physicians about radiation and the effects of radiation on people. I start teaching physicians about radiation when they become radiation oncologists, when they're residents learning how to treat cancer with radiation. And I explain to them the difference between the dose of radiation you're given to a tumor to kill it and the dose of radiation you're giving to a body when you image it with a CT scanner. All right, so I can go on and on and on about this, but Chris has put me a nice list of things together here I'm supposed to talk about. Normally I have a nice slideshow with pictures, but this is just as fun talking to you guys. You timing me or something?
Yeah, exactly.
But you're recording. Okay, so we're going to talk about natural stuff. I talked about cosmic radiation. Well, we're sending people to the moon and Mars very shortly. The Artemis rocket was supposed to go up a couple weeks ago, and I have an experiment on that rocket with NASA. And that experiment is to see what happens to a living thing in outer space, because of all the cosmic radiation out there is very damaging to the living thing's DNA. And that's what we worry about when it comes to radiation, our DNA getting damaged. Well, these living things we're sending into space, in my opinion, are the perfect astronauts. They don't need to breathe, they don't need to eat, they don't need to drink water, and they don't care what temperature it is, but they're alive. Can you imagine what they are? Everyone has it in their fridge probably at home. Desiccated yeast. They are alive, but they do not need any of the basic things for life. So they can go 40 million kilometers into space, and we can wake them up along the way on their trip and find out how their DNA is actually handling that damage out there. Because it's hard to send humans out there because they need oxygen. You don't have oxygen after 5 minutes, you're done. Then you can last a little bit longer if you have oxygen, but then you need water. Can't last long without water. Then you need food, and you got to stay warm. So these are a perfect model for us to understand what's going on in space with the space radiation we're sending them out in. We were at that launch waiting for the big minute when the experiment goes into space, and then they canceled it. They scrubbed it. 40 minutes to go. But what I did bring is this can of beer that is made with those astronauts. We actually grew those yeast up with NASA's permission in our secret lab underground. It's not secret. It's called the SNO Lab, Submarine Neutrino Observatory. And it is the lab that we do our experiments in because it has no radiation. It was designed so there's absolutely no radiation. 50 million times less cosmic radiation down there. No natural background radiation, it's all shielded. And our hypothesis is that you take that away from living things, it's going to be detrimental. Because we've all had radiation in our systems from the minute we were born, or the minute we were conceived. So our experiments are designed to understand ultra low levels of radiation all the way down to nothing. But how can we get down to nothing if you have to feed our cells potassium that has potassium-40 in it? Well, we ordered a very expensive order of potassium-39, so no potassium-40. So we have all these ways of understanding how this radioactive stuff works in our body and our systems. And we're really starting to understand the effects of radiation at very low doses. So maybe what I'll do is talk a little bit about, you hear about doses. You mentioned some terminology, becquerels. I tell you right now, the most confusing thing about understanding radiation is understanding doses. All right? So let's say you're going to go get a CAT scan, and you get 10 millisieverts worth of radiation. Well, milli is small. Well, what's a sievert? Well, sievert's a really tricky number. Because a sievert really isn't a dose, and I don't want to get anyone confusing this, I like to talk with bananas. Banana equivalence is a lot easier for people to understand. Doses in sieverts and doses in gray, I just came back from Bruce Power, and they talk about REMs and RADs, which is sort of outdated, but you can't change the nuclear people. Once they get their head, they're not going to change the terminology. REMs and RADs, grays and sieverts, becquerels, curies. These are all things we use to talk about radiation, which basically means nothing to most people, right? A becquerel is one of the easiest ones to remember because it's a decay per second, okay? So if I turn on my Geiger counter here, which measures it's about a decay per second, roughly. A couple fast ones, a couple slow ones. That's natural background radiation right now. These are mostly gamma rays coming from space or from the walls hitting you guys right now. Okay, that's basically a becquerel worth of radiation, a decay a second. If I take this rock that I got from Elliott Lake in one of the uranium mines, it has uranium. That's why it was mined in the days, and it has about 1% uranium in the rock, okay? So the rock is 1% uranium. The reason Elliott Lake isn't mining right now is because it costs more money per pound to get the uranium out than it's worth on the market right now. All those prices are going up. At 1%, you can't, it's unaffordable to mine, so they closed all the mines down. Decommissioned all the mines, everything's gone back to sort of the wilderness. Lots of fish there now because all the miners left and they weren't fishing them all out. Lots of moose now because there's no hunters anymore. But this 1% uranium here, the 1% of the uranium is basically made up of two forms of uranium. Uranium-238 and uranium-235. So if I had 140 kilograms of this rock sitting here in front of me, 1 kilogram of that rock would be made up of uranium-235, and the other 139 kilograms would be uranium-238. Uranium-235 is what we need to do fission. The other stuff, 238 does not undergo fission. It will absorb some neutrons and become plutonium, and then that can be fissionable. But in general, it's only the 0.7% of that natural uranium that we use in the reactors to do fission. And in those fuel bundles, when they're in the nuclear reactor, we only use about half of that. So the bundles still have half of the uranium-235 in them that they started with. They're burning about 0.35%. This bundle stays in the reactor for roughly 18 months, and the fuel handlers know how to move them around to keep them going. But eventually, because half the 235 has been burned up, it starts contaminating the reaction. So it gets inefficient. So it's easier for us, rather than to try and run it longer, to just change out the fuel. Right? So you have your 0.7% uranium-235 in here. And just to show you, that sounds an awful lot, isn't it? Not that much. The balloon's going to be that radioactive in a little bit, I think. So this is your sort of your uranium, and now we have mines in Canada that basically have up to 20% natural uranium in the rock. And the thing about CANDU reactors is they use natural uranium. There's no enrichment, and that means that we don't increase the amount of uranium-235 like other reactors do. Okay, so it's just the 0.7% in these fuel pellets in those bundles, and we burn up about half of it over the lifetime of the bundle, and then we store them in a swimming pool. And when that thing comes out, like Dr. Keefer was saying, it's very radioactive. It is a very potent anti-terrorist tool, because you can't handle it. It'll kill you. Now, if he's saying roughly minutes, I would say seconds, because what we talk about in radiation in terms of killing things in humans, we say it's 4 gray of radiation will kill about half the people. That's called the LD50. Half the people in this room would die by exposure right now to 4 gray of radiation. All right? Why only half would die? That's one of the questions we always have. Which half would die? All this half, but not that half? Or every second person? That's the reason that only half people die is for a number of reasons, and mostly it's because of our DNA repair systems. What you ate, how you exercise, what your genetics are, what the environment is you live in. A lot of things will predict how we respond to radiation as an individual. So we're talking about this lethal dose, LD50 of 4 gray. Well, how much dose comes off a fuel bundle when it comes out of a reactor about this far away? How about 54,000? Okay, that's pretty hot. But within 10 years, 99.9% of that radiation is gone in the swimming pools. So we're talking about the 0.1% that's left. And what's the dose right now? Well, the dose coming off that fuel bundle after about 200 years is roughly about the dose you get from getting a CT scan. So in 200 years, I would stand beside this thing for an hour and get the same dose you get from a CT scan. And then after that, about 500 years, it goes down to almost nothing. It takes, you can talk about a million years later, but after about 500 years, there's really nothing left to worry about. So it's not this idea that it's all going to be bad for eternity. But in terms of, I think that we have to understand that radiation dose is a hard thing to understand, and it's very dangerous, like Chris said, for the first little while, but we know how to manage it and how to handle it. You don't want to get stuck behind one of those trucks that move the big containers with all the spent fuel. I don't know what they weigh, but they move really slow because they're super heavy. And so if you get stuck behind one, it's like, it moves about a foot every, second or two. So in other words, we have all this radioactive stuff around us. I brought a few other things here. This is a radium dial clock. We learned very early on that if you eat a lot of radium, it's very bad for you. Radium is like calcium. It goes to your bones. And if you eat it, it accumulates in your bones, and it will cause bone cancer. We learned that because in the early days when we had the radium dial painters, mostly women, during the war, painting instrumentation on aircraft instruments so that you could see the instruments at night, it glows in the dark, radium does. So this is a radium dial clock, which I got off the internet. That's even a little more than uranium, right? So that's the clock. And what happened was, when the ladies were painting these dials, they would dip the brush into the paint, put it on. It was very expensive. The paint was very expensive at the time. So they were being very careful to preserve as much as they could. And they dipped the tip in their mouths, and they put it in the radium, and they put it on and make that nice sharp point. Then, unfortunately, women started getting cancer in the jaw, cancer in their bones. And someone realized, this is too close to something radioactive. Then they realized that this is dangerous for us. Don't eat it. The first sort of instance where health physics actually help people. Don't eat it. Keep it away from your body, and you'll be fine. And then we realized also, too, that you needed a massive dose of this stuff in your body to cause cancer. And it didn't cause cancer in everybody. So we learned a lot in the early days of how, when we mishandled this kind of radioactive stuff. We know a lot now about it. We know more about radiation and the effect on human bodies than almost any other agent on this planet, because we studied it so many times, so many different ways, and so many different things. So I want to talk a little bit about medical exposures, because we're talking about bananas. Have you ever heard of a DEXA scan? It's a scan, it's called dual X-ray absorptiometry, and what it does is it looks at your bones, and it says, how dense are my bones? Because as we age, our bones get weaker, they demineralize, especially in women. They're particularly vulnerable to bone demineralization or osteoporosis. Some women have bones that are so fragile that even taking a big step can break a hip. So we got to monitor how these bones are developing and demineralizing. And so we do these DEXA scans. We scan your whole body. And I usually show a picture of my family, my wife and I, and my 2 kids, DEXA scans, like skeletons. I think you need to Google it on the internet. You'll see our Christmas card. I sent it out with 4 skeletons and a DEXA scan. But that DEXA scan gives you the equivalent dose of 4 bananas, which, again, in terms of doses, I said it was 54,000 gray from that fuel when it comes out of the reactor. A banana has 0.0004 milligray, millions of that, or thousands of that. So it's tiny amounts of radiation. And people say, well, maybe I shouldn't eat bananas. Well, no, bananas are good for you. You need potassium. Potassium 40 is just part of it. I think one of the examples of potassium 40 that I can talk about was when I was a farmer. I had a 50-acre vineyard, and I would use 400 pounds per acre of potash, or potassium, as fertilizer. Well, you can imagine that a percentage of that is potassium 40. And I did a calculation on when I'm handling the fertilizer, filling my fertilizer spreader, just by handling it and holding it against my body and pouring it in, I would get the equivalent, by the time I was done my 30 acres of grapes, equivalent of about 2 chest x-rays worth of radiation from the potassium. Well, that doesn't matter to me. It's the small doses, but that's the reality of it. Is we get exposed to the radiation all the time. All right, so I'm going to pull off my balloon because I want to get some questions in here. I'm sure we have lots of questions. This can of beer, like I said, is made with the yeast that we grew in the snow lab from deep down, and is also going in the spaceship, is part of a program called REPAIR. And REPAIR stands for Researching the Effects in the Absence of Ionizing Radiation. And so we have these yeasts in here that made this beer. And this beer was sold, and $1 per can it was sold went towards cancer research. Because what we're doing is we're studying how the absence of radiation actually increases cancer risk, which is hard to believe, but that has to do with the way our systems respond to radiation. I did some experiments when I was at McMaster where we compared the effects of exercise with the effects of radiation. You know, exercise and radiation, what the heck do they have to do with each other? Well, we trained mice to run on treadmills, and we looked at their cancer risks after they were exercised quite a bit. And then we also gave same mice, same strains, same genetic background, doses of radiation through CAT scans, CT scanners. And we calculated the dose of CT scan we could give to the mice, and we exercised the other group of mice. And then we studied the mice in terms of how well their DNA repair systems work. Because the radiation, just like the exercise, stimulates your repair system. You make free radicals in your cells. Your cells can respond to that by making antioxidants. DNA repair mechanism get turned on. Your cells are healthier when you exercise them or when you give them radiation, all through this free radical process. So we understand a lot about how these free radicals work, and that's why we're researching the effects of the absence of radiation on how cancer forms in human cells. And this just says this beer was made in the absence of cosmic rays. Doesn't taste any better, but still all right. So one thing I will do is I'll test my my balloon. Now you might have seen me. I have this balloon, right? I have two balloons. They're orange, and like I said, I was trying to get a static charge on it so I can collect the charged particles from the daughter products in the air that decay. So if you look at this, here's the balloon. Actually, not too much. So the balloon is not radioactive. Let's find out if we collect any radioactivity in the air. So remember, radon is an inert gas. It decays into daughter products that are radioactive. It gets stuck on the charged particles, the dust in the air, and I charge this balloon up, and hopefully it will have radioactivity on it. Large surface area, and I'm decreasing the surface area. I had one blow up in my face for that. Just spread some radioactivity everywhere. All right, so this charge, this is the air you've been breathing while I've been talking and while Chris has been talking. That's the balloon with the air that you've been breathing. Does that sound like a lot of radiation? It's small amounts, but it's still from the air. So that's an example of when you're having a party for your grandkids, your kids, and you rub balloons and stick them on the wall, you're collecting radioactivity, and you're sending kids home with these radioactive balloons. So, shame on you guys. That's all. Just one more thing. If you guys ever seen this stuff called Fiesta ware, back in the day, they used to coat glassware like this, plates, other things that we eat with uranium oxide, and then make it into a ceramic, something like our fuel pellets. This uranium oxide ceramic makes a nice orange color, right? It's a radioactive drink container. Now it's funny, I picked this up at an antique store in St. George, Ontario, where I used to live. So I was walking down the street and I seen all this orange stuff and went, so I ran home and got my Geiger counter. Went in the store and started measuring all this stuff. And I said, I'll take that one, I'll take that one, I'll take that one. And the lady's looking at me and said, what are you doing? I said, it's radioactive stuff, I want to buy it. So I could show her. So it's all this stuff is all around us all the time. And people really don't understand that it's a natural thing.
Just, I'll start the questions maybe. And I kind of know the answer to this one, but I thought it was really interesting. Doug was talking to me about CT scans, because as physicians, we get pretty nervous, right? We have a lot of parents come in with a 2-year-old, they fall down all the time, they hit their head, and the parents want the kid to have a CT scan, and it's almost never necessary, but the parents are begging you to give your kid essentially the annual background dose of radiation they would get over a whole year in 2 seconds to their brain, right? And me and Doug were talking about CT scans and that similar sort of mechanism of action by which radiation and your body's metabolism, aerobic metabolism, how that works. So Doug, can you compare? Yeah, this was a cool one.
Yeah.
What's the question again? You can.
I know the question. So people are worried about getting a CT scan because the radiation will cause damage to their cells, and those cells then could mutate into cancer, right? We have many powerful mechanisms in our body to prevent that from happening. Like I mentioned before, genetics. We have things called tumor suppressor genes that will detect some damage that's not repairable and get rid of those cells. Because we have about 300 trillion cells in our body, and we lose about 3 million a minute because they just die, because they're unstable. We don't want them in our body. And that's a natural process called tumor suppression. And we can stimulate that by doing many things. But what happens is, when you're breathing air, you get all these free radical screws in your things called mitochondria, which are the little machines in your cells that make energy for you. And they create these damaging molecules inside your cells that cause DNA damage. Well, about 10,000 DNA alterations per hour are going on in your body. So you've been here about an hour. 10,000 changes to your DNA, every cell in your body has happened in that hour. So your cells are continually repairing that stuff, or getting rid of the cells. Apoptosis, programmed cell death. Oh, this cell is damaged, get rid of it, and replace it with a new one that's better off. So 10,000 alterations per hour in your cells, every hour. So now you're at the hospital, you're having a CT scan, and you know how long you have to wait in hospitals. You know you're going to sit there for an hour at least. So you're sitting for an hour, and you've got 10,000 DNA alterations in every cell in your body, and you're going to worry about the CT scanner. How many DNA alterations do you think the CT scanner is going to give you? It gives you about 100. You got 10,000 sitting there every hour of your life, and now you're going to get 100 more. Which is why we say there's no risk from getting DNA damage from a CT scan. Even though people are taught that, even though some of the people still insist that all radiation is bad no matter what it is, the reality of it is our bodies deal with a lot more damage naturally than we do from medical diagnostics. We can get high doses, higher doses that can cause problems. Occasionally a machine fails, and you see an example of where a person has a band of radiation burn around their head because the CT scanner screwed up and burnt them. It happens.
I've never seen it, but...
It's there on the internet. It happens. If you happen to be an excessively overweight person, there's a cutoff when they can actually do an x-ray for you. Because the x-rays these days measure the dose, the exposure you get, by a detector on the other side of you. And if you're too big, and the detector can't get enough signal from it, you can't get an x-ray. Have you read that happen yet?
Yeah. We go to agricultural college.
I think it's cut off around 260 pounds or 270 pounds.
More.
Cut off, something like that. You gotta get close. Careful. Anyway, so...
Yeah, well, I guess I'll let the MC open it to questions.